got it? All right, so you guys were here in November when I gave this presentation. What I did is I had to do an action research project for my graduate school program, and I was testing or comparing, I was doing a study comparing teacher-directed instruction and student-directed instruction. So to define what that is, teacher-directed is more like what's unpopular today in education. A lot of people think of it as sitting and getting information, retaining information for standardized testing, and just kind of like sitting there and being controlled. Whereas student-based learning is more like you get research, you go do independent study, you kind of build your own learning without the teacher having so much control. So I wanted to see which one was best for maybe Lakeside's brand of students, because I feel like teacher-directed instruction is not necessarily totally a bad thing. It actually can fit and mold our kids maybe more effectively than more student-directed instruction. So I know you guys can't see this poster. This is the poster I have to show my classmates tomorrow. So I kind of bumped everything up and zoomed in on it. So these were my two research questions. Does more teacher-directed instruction contribute to higher scores on assessment than student-directed instruction? And does more teacher-directed instruction contribute to less referrals or disciplinary interventions in the classroom than teacher-directed instruction? My hypothesis was that teacher-directed would improve or do better with both academics and behavior. So here, well, first of all, let me tell you how I did the study. So I had third period and seventh period. They're basically identical. Almost the same class size. Seventh period, 29 students. Third period, 26. They have the same amount of, roughly the same amount of gen ed students, almost the same amount of sped students, 8 in period 3 and then 7 in period 7. And then there were 3 ELL students. So I kind of broke it down by subgroups too to see how each subgroup was impacted and whatnot. So what I would do, I would give 5 assessments, and I did all of them through EduElastic so that it would keep the data for me. All the tests were the same. It showed me what standards the kids were good at. And I did 2 lessons leading up, usually 2 or 3 lessons leading up to each assessment. So on the same day, let's say third period, they would get student-directed instruction. That might be go research something about the Missouri Compromise and tell me why it was important, and they're basically building their own learning in groups, doing web quests, all kinds of other problem-based learning. Seventh period, we get a teacher-directed example of it. It would be me talking, showing pictures on the PowerPoint, talking with elbow partners, video. It was more teacher-directed where they were just sitting at their desk, less movement and more control for the teacher. So I compared those. I did 2 lessons leading up to each assessment, and then I also kept tally of every time I had to do an intervention. So for instance, in third period, if a student was, I don't know, laying their head down, say, hey, Michael, get your head up. That's one intervention. Or if it was teacher-directed and a student was talking to someone next to them and I needed to redirect them in order to gain control of the class, that would be another intervention. So here were the results. Academic-wise, every single subgroup did better with teacher-directed instruction on their assessment. By the way, they got the exact same assessment. So every single subgroup, gen ed students, sped students, ELL students, they did better with teacher-directed instruction. But as a whole, they were pretty close. So I'll get to why this data, why it looks like this is convincing and why this doesn't look so convincing. Behavior-wise, the behavior stuff was very messy. So to explain this, this tells how many days I spent teaching a lesson or how many days I tracked their behavior. And I tracked interventions, referrals, and then how many common students committed all those things, okay? Anyway, I'll just get to the nitty-gritty here of the results. The results showed this. First of all, sped students, see if my highlighter works in this. Okay, it's not going to work. Anyway, sped students, if you look right here at this stat, they did better, way better. Wait, that's gen ed students. I'm sorry. Let's see if I can get the highlighter going. Whatever, I'm trying to be fancy. The sped students did way better. If you look right here, they did way better academically, and they also did way better behaviorally. That's a staggering number. Basically, 57 more interventions or redirections had to be given to sped students when they were in student-directed instruction. And I think I attribute that to them not being able to stay focused. Maybe the content's too hard. Maybe they don't understand how to work independently. They don't have the discipline to do it. all those
Will
things.
Stevens, please report to door 1. Your ride is here. Will Stevens, if you're in the building, please report to door 1. Your ride is here.
All right. Anyway, SPED students, though, with teacher-directed, they only had 17 interventions, meaning they were much more engaged. I had Miss McDonald sitting with about a group of 4 of them, 4 different ones each day, and they had to be redirected much less of the time. And then, if you look, they also had, since they had to be redirected less, they did 17% totally, or as a total, better. And they did better on every assessment than the SPED group in 3rd period. The ELL data is not very telling, and I'll tell you why. Period 3, two of those 3 ELL students are beginning, or they're just now learning English. It's not very easy because sometimes I didn't have teaching assistants that could translate for them. I had to use other students. I had to sit with them as well to kind of get them to get through the assessment. And period 7, they had 2 of the 3 students were at emerging, or they're close to being done out of the ELL program. So the ELL data I didn't read too much into, but the big pull away from this study is this. SPED students benefited greatly more from teacher-directed instruction. There was no question about it. Behaviorally and academically, they were more focused, more engaged, and it showed on their assessment. Gen Ed students, though, I would say there's not conclusive evidence to say that either one is better. I think student-directed instruction, they did fine with. They scored only 4% totally, as a little bit less than the teacher-directed class. But behaviorally, this is where it's interesting. I actually had to give way more interventions to the student or teacher-directed class when I was trying to keep them all engaged, trying to show videos, trying to talk PowerPoints, trying to do those type of instructional strategies. They had 21 more interventions than the Gen Ed students in student-directed. So I think what I'm kind of getting at is this. If you do student-directed instruction, Gen Ed students can adapt better to the content. They have more freedom, they have more discipline than the SPED students perhaps, and they also just feel like more things can kind of fly by when you're doing student-directed instruction. Whereas, you know, if students are talking in a group and they're giggling and whatnot, I'm not going to redirect that if I know they're focused. However, if we're in a whole class setting, that's something I would engage with. So that might also tell why there's way more interventions with Gen Ed students. But the overall results, the conclusion is this: SPED students, there's no question, benefited greatly more with teacher-directed instruction. It was inconclusive academically, probably, for ELL students, but Gen Ed students did better with teacher-directed instruction academically, but behaviorally, it's up in the air. I would say Gen Ed students with student-directed instruction did better, and SPED students did better behaviorally with teacher-directed instruction. All right, so I know that's a lot of information. Questions? Just maybe a few. Go ahead.
A couple of questions. When you are using student-directed instruction with SPED students, what accommodations do they get, or is it different when it's teacher-directed because it's more manageable?
I think it's that, and they don't get any different assignments. They get probably less focused help because I had the teaching assistant just sitting with them, tracking, pacing them, making sure they're with the reading, making sure their heads were up. And I think it was just more the differentiation of instruction. I think the video helped them a lot. I think seeing pictures helped them make connections to what they're reading. I think even putting captions on the TV when we're watching a video, I'll stop it and I'll have somebody read the caption out loud. I was like, what do you think they meant by that? What was the narrator in the video meaning by that? I think just seeing it in different ways is what made the difference for them. It wasn't necessarily modifying worksheets or readings. It was more control and just more diverse instruction. All right, anything else? Wayne?
Yeah. Do you find that, especially while you were doing this, that it's kind of subjective in terms of, especially the discipline aspect of it? Because I think sometimes you feel like when you're having a snapshot or you're a long evaluation, that you pick up and you notice every little sound, every little person moving, compared to like this, where you're kind of trying to zero in a little bit on behavior in the back of your mind. Did you find yourself maybe overdoing the nitpicking of the discipline?
Maybe, and to be honest with you, I tried not to more for student-directed instruction because I felt like I kind of had a bias coming in for teacher-directed since my hypothesis supported both sides. So in fact, when I did student-directed instruction and they were in their groups, I actually let more go, where I tried to let more go. And when I was in teacher-directed, I was much more on it because, well, the reason why I was much more on teacher-directed instruction is that you can't be effective teaching with a whole class environment if you're not putting out fires and making sure that they know not to do that again.
Right.
So I think to your point, if anything, I tried more for student-directed instruction to let things slide a little bit because I wanted the study to actually show something. So, but yeah, it's definitely subjective. I mean,
Yeah.
a kid, like I said, in teacher-directed, two kids talking to each other, I'm going to break it up. But if they're talking to each other in groups and they're laughing, but they're still on task, I'm letting it go. So I think you're right. Yeah, there probably is a difference. Anything else?
Well, just a thought or two. It's a great job, and I know it was a lot of work. It would be interesting to break it down even a little more in Lexiles, because I think that we have, sometimes we struggle with comprehension in our students.
Attention to the building, Alexis Sparks. If you are in the building, please report to the main office. Alexis Sparks. If you are in the building, please report to the main office. Thank you.
Our students will read something, whether it's historical information or something about a country we're studying, or even directions. We'll read directions, and yet will not be able to comprehend what they're supposed to do or what they just read. So with the reading comprehension problem, I can see that teacher instructed, showing videos, walking them through it, explaining this, explaining that, reading something, talking about it as a class would really make a difference. And even if it was something that they were interested in, to be given free rein to do their own thing and research, I could see would be maybe difficult for them if they were comprehension problems. So it would be interesting to see it broken down in Lexiles too, how the students did.
I agree, and I put that in my future recommendations to break it down even more, like you said, with Lexile. But I think I'd be interested in seeing how this works in a school setting that's not like Lakeside. Like if it was at Jefferson, or if it was at a parochial school or something like that. Would this make a difference? Does it vary from urban, suburban, private schools?
Well, I'd like to weigh in on that too. I think that anyone that has taught for a while understands if a student is interested and if a student has self-motivation, absolutely. Student-directed is great, it's
Absolutely.
great. But in some instances, there needs to be some training.
I agree.
And
So that's all I got. If you guys don't have any questions.
Good job, Jake.
Thank you.